LeonardLopez.org.
Today on the Leonard Lopez Show, Greece's former finance minister discusses what caused the financial crisis in his country and across Europe. Plus, hear about the life of former FIFA executive Chuck Blazer and how he escaped prosecution by becoming an FBI informant. That's today at noon on WNYC. And now I want you to imagine this scenario as part of our 30 Issues in 30 Weeks election series. This week's topic is what America gets wrong and right about healthcare. And every day this week, we're walking you through a different healthcare scenario from a different country so you can see how it compares to our American system. So today, what would happen if you were going to have a baby in Norway? Well, first of all, you'd probably hear a lot of this. Congratulations, you're about to have a yente baby, or a Gutenborn. That's what all of your Norwegian friends would say to you if you were expecting to bring a baby girl or baby boy into the world. They'd also tell you to put your wallet away. Prenatal care in Norway is completely covered under the publicly financed national healthcare system. That means expectant mothers pay exactly $0.00 in out-of-pocket fees for medical appointments during and immediately after their pregnancies. In fact, not only are Norwegian citizens not expected to pay anything for birth-related costs, the government literally pays you to have children. Along with your bundle of joy, you get a bundle of cash from the government totaling about $5,000. And it doesn't end there. You'll also receive small monthly deposits into your bank account until your child turns 18 to help offset the cost of raising a kid. Now, if any parents listening here in America can recall the distinct mix of joy and horror when you first held your your pink little newborn in one arm and your 10-page itemized hospital bill in the other, the Norwegian way sounds pretty good now, doesn't it? We'll keep talking about healthcare systems here in America and in other countries every day this week in our 30 Issues in 30 Weeks election series. And if you want to learn more about what having a baby would typically cost in America, Japan, or France, we have a little comparison on our website. You can see how they stack up at wnyc.org/30issues. And before we leave the topic, we've got some exciting news. We're launching a newsletter for our 30 Issues election series. It'll be a once-a-week digest sent straight to your inbox with bonus content, some of my own thoughts, and fun facts that didn't make it to our airwaves. So sign up to be a part of our newsletter club by visiting wnyc.org/30issues. That's the number 30. So wnyc.org/30issues. Brian Lehrer on WNYC, and yesterday it was announced that the family of Tamir Rice would receive a $6 million settlement from the city of Cleveland, stemming from a wrongful death lawsuit. Tamir Rice was the 12-year-old boy, if you don't know, who was shot almost instantly upon being seen by a rookie Cleveland police officer Timothy Lehman, in 2014. Officer Lehman or Lohman said he believed the toy gun Tamir Rice had in his possession was a real firearm and feared for his life. The police dispatcher who called in the report of a young man carrying a gun failed to inform the officer and his partner that there was a possibility the gun was not a real firearm. Ultimately, a grand jury elected not to indict the officer as a result of what the Rice family lawyers said was the city prosecutor advocating for the police and not the victim. Joining me now is one of the lawyers who represented the family of Tamir Rice, Jonathan Abedi. Jonathan, Mr. Abedi, welcome to WNYC. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today.
Well, thanks for having me, Brian.
And the major headline, as I see it this morning, as it relates to the $6 million settlement, is the response from the head of the Cleveland Police Patrolmen's Association, Steve Loomis, who, after the settlement was announced yesterday, suggested that Tamir Rice's family used the money to educate children about the dangers of handling real and replica firearms. What's your response to this as attorney for the family?
You know, to say that it's a disappointing comment, I think, would be an understatement. It's shockingly insensitive and really ridiculous. But I think reflective of an organization and an agency that is in the dark ages and in tremendous denial about their own responsibility and culpability. It's a dramatic example of blaming the victim. I mean, the idea that the family should donate part of its money to educating people about possessing toy guns is sort of ludicrous. So it's a depressing, I think, statement by the Policemen's Benevolent Association, reflecting their insensitivity and the degree of their tone deafness.
Here's the mayor of Cleveland, Frank Jackson. This is a 45-second clip of him commenting on the settlement between the city and the Tamir Rice family.
We have settled the legal side of the lawsuit in regards to the Rice family and the estate. And as you also know, this has been a very difficult time for the Rice family in particular, but for Cleveland in general and the community. And while we have settled the legal side of this and the court proceeding side of this for $6 million, there is no price that you can put on the life of the loss of a 12-year-old child.
The mayor of Cleveland, Frank Jackson, speaking yesterday. Under terms of the settlement, the city does not admit wrongdoing, yet the grand jury found that the shooting was a, quote, perfect storm of human error, mistakes, and communications, unquote. And I imagine that's just a legal stipulation, Mr. Abadi, to protect the city from any further lawsuits or any further legal liability for Tamir Rice's death? Or how do you understand the combination of the city agreeing to pay the family $6 million and not admitting wrongdoing?
Well, I think it's an obvious contradiction. It's a fiction. It's an artifice. I'm not sure why, at this point, we need to engage in that kind of fictionalization. It's obvious that there was wrongdoing here. It's sort of a standard, sort of antiquated procedure that municipalities, when they settle cases that I think plainly involve wrongdoing, they feel some need to suggest that there's no admission of liability. But obviously the city of Cleveland recognizes that something horribly wrong occurred here. If it hadn't occurred, they wouldn't be paying a substantial sum of money in a symbolic attempt to address it. So I think it's just in sort of an outdated, antiquated ritual that in the paperwork they recite that there's no admission of wrongdoing. Obviously this was something that was horribly wrong and horribly tragic and should have never happened. It was senseless and really barbaric at a certain level.
Now, this settlement with Cleveland could be seen as part of a series of seven-figure payouts by cities to African Americans, the families of people who've been killed by police, including the Eric Garner family here in New York, the Freddie Gray family in Baltimore, though a prosecution of several officers is going on in that case. Many news reports say the settlement spares Cleveland the possibility of a federal civil rights trial. In other words, going to the next level, having the U.S. Justice Department look at possible criminal prosecution in the case. Do you think that the two are related?
Well, I think there's some relationship. I think the resolution of the federal civil rights case does not mean that the Department of Justice does not still have a role to play here. And in fact, we have met with the Department of Justice, and we have asked and encouraged them to take a second look at this case and conduct a formal investigation, because we are regrettably thoroughly convinced that the criminal prosecution at the local municipal level was contaminated by corruption and unfairness. And historically, the Department of Justice, the federal government, has had to step in frequently when municipal local law enforcement fails to properly discharge its duties. So our understanding is the Department of Justice is looking at this. This is obviously a national problem, which the federal government has an obligation to be overseeing. And our understanding is that they are looking at this. And so that examination by the Department of Justice is not mutually exclusive, or is not mooted out by the fact that we've settled the federal civil rights lawsuit.
Why settle from the city's point of view? Obviously, you're the lawyer who represents the family, but why do you think, from the city's point of view, they would settle and pay $6 million without going to trial? It's hard to imagine that the jury would have awarded much more than that.
Well, I think it goes back to your sort of earlier point. I think that there is a recognition, and I think if you listen to the mayor's comments, there's no mystery here. This is obvious. This was a disaster for the city of Cleveland and for the police department. There's no question that what happened here was horribly wrong. And I think it would be a further disaster to air this out, and very divisive for the community, to air out in excruciating detail all of the errors that led up to this. This was a horrible case. This is a police department that has been under federal scrutiny for more than a decade, and they've been under federal scrutiny by the Department of Justice, by the FBI, because they have a long-standing problem of using excessive force. And they've failed to rectify it over 12 years, and all of that failure would come out in, I think, very embarrassing detail in terms of demonstrating the delinquency and ineptness of the city of Cleveland and the Cleveland Police Department in dealing with a very serious problem. And so that portion of this would be very embarrassing for the city. And then the hiring of the police officer who actually discharged the fatal shots is another layer of embarrassment. This is a police officer who never should have been in uniform carrying a badge. He was emotionally unfit. It was clear that he was emotionally unfit to be a police officer. He had broken down on the firing range in another police department previously. They found him unfit, and for some inexplicable, bizarre reason, Cleveland hired him anyway. And, the perfect storm was, involved somebody who was completely incompetent in a position of authority who was carrying a gun. And so I think that the reason that the city settled this case is they recognized how horribly wrong they were, and that they had an obligation to resolve this.
Jonathan Abity with us, attorney for the family of Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old shot dead by a police officer in Cleveland. The officer was not indicted, though the grand jury found the shooting was a, quote, perfect storm of human error, mistakes, and communications. And the city of Cleveland yesterday settled a civil suit with the Rice family for $6 million. How do you see the civil suits in cases like this and others where there's no indictment of the police officer in terms of rendering justice?
Well, I think there is no such thing as justice on top of a tragedy like this. It's a very imperfect system. Think about what the loss is here. It's a young child who was 12 years old, killed for really no legitimate reason. And there's nothing that can bring that child back. There's no legal action. There's no court proceeding. There's nothing any of us can do to bring that child back and to rectify that tragedy. That tragedy and the suffering of this family is eternal. It will live forever. And so I think there's sort of an inherent inadequacy in the civil suit to address the fundamental wrong here. That being said, we have to, as a society, do what we can do, recognizing that you can't bring the child back. And part of what I think the society needs to do in situations like this is hold people accountable. I mean, this is a huge problem. Every time we open the newspaper, we turn on the TV, there seems to be another case of an impermissible wrongful shooting, frequently in communities of color, frequently in underprivileged, communities. Akai Gurley, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Walter Scott. I mean, the list is endless. And so we have to do what we can. One step is holding people accountable. And so we look to the criminal law to hold people responsible when they are criminally responsible.